Our guest this episode on the right, Deb Toivonen. On the left, Stephanie Trudel. Issue 1. Our local legislative delegation found itself split recently on the so-called red flag bill, which allows for the removal of firearms from people accused of being a danger to themselves and others. State Representatives Natalie Higgins of Leominster and Steve Hay of Fitchburg voted in favor of the bill, while State Rep. John Zlotnick of Gardner and State Senator Dean Tran voted against it. Which side did a better job representing the constituents of this area on this issue, Cindy?
I'm going to say Dean Tran and Zlotnick. Definitely. I think we got to be really careful around the Second Amendment, and this crosses the line as far as I'm concerned.
Stephanie?
I disagree. I think it's good legislation. It goes for safety, and I think that's important.
Deb?
No, I have to go with Zlotnick and Tran. I believe it's an invasion to a person's privacy into their own home, and that there's other ways of protecting someone's safety.
Toivonen. Nailed it. Mike?
Two separate questions. Was it a good bill? No, not really. It was a rather flawed bill. It needed a better design to it, needed more work to it. Did they represent the will of the voters? Well, you had a mixture of people that voted yes and no, and maybe that does represent the cross-section of voters around here, because I don't think it's a unanimous opinion either way.
So what should our delegation have done? Should they vote for a flawed bill, or they should vote for the will of the people?
No, but that gets away from your original question. Is the bill flawed? Yes. I mean, if I were a legislator, I probably would have had the same opinion as Representative Zlotnick, who does a great job out in Gardner. It's a flawed bill just because there aren't enough due process protections in the bill. But the question as to whether it represents what the voters' opinion is, if you really take a cross-section of voters out there, you're going to be surprised. There's going to be people that sound like Cindy and Deb. There's going to be people who sound like Stephanie. I think you'd be surprised if you actually talked to some voters out there.
Stephanie, what do you like about the bill?
I like that there is a chance for people to appeal if they're brought to court. What this bill does is it allows someone close to the person or a police officer to petition a judge to remove their guns. It's not like the police just walk in on a tip and take your guns away from you right away. There has to be probable cause. There has to be a justifiable action that someone is behaving in an unsafe or unstable way.
There has to be probable cause in order for the guns to be confiscated? Because that's not how I read the bill.
My interpretation was that you are able to petition a judge for a temporary removal of up to 1 year. Correct. That it is up to a judge, and that evidence has to be presented in order to have those.
But until that hearing happens, the guns are confiscated.
I am unsure of that, to be completely honest.
It is.
I've heard that you have to hire an attorney on your own expense.
Yes.
I don't know how true this is. I just heard it today, and I didn't have time to really research it, which to me I think is very unfair, because that's an expense that you're incurring. Why?
To keep your rights.
Right, exactly.
And a lot of people are going
it's
to
a Second Amendment
Let me ask you
right.
this. Right now, up to this point with the red flag bill, anyone could go to the police chief and present their evidence to the police chief. And the police chief has unilateral discretion to go remove those firearms, suspend the LTC, and then there's a judicial review. What this does is it opens up beyond the police chief, where other parties can file for the ERPO, the guns are automatically confiscated, and the LTC is confiscated until there's a hearing before a judge. So let me ask you this. I'm going to ask you this scenario, Stephanie, because you're supporting the bill. Okay? You are in an abusive relationship. You have a gun at home, and that gun is really the only thing that's keeping that predator, that ex-boyfriend, at bay. So now the ex-boyfriend says, aha, we have a new red flag bill. So he files an ERPO against you. Your guns are automatically confiscated until you get a hearing down the road, whether it be 20 days or 30 days. Now, he just used the state and this new law to disarm his victim. What did I say about that scenario that could be wrong?
Well, if someone is using it egregiously, that's clearly an issue, and there should be some form of protection put into place. My understanding is that's where the judicial review comes in. It's quite interesting that you use that kind of a situation, because if you have a gun in the home and you're in an abusive relationship, the statistics of you being injured by that gun go through the roof. I don't recall the actual numbers off the top of my head, but you can Google those.
But right now, the way the current law is, if you are a victim of domestic violence and you get a restraining order against somebody, they automatically lose their guns already. So there already are protections
Get the
for
209A,
the violent offenders. But this is going far beyond that. This is going to, anybody could just make an accusation, and who's protecting me and my right?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? They have to respond under this bill and take the guns, and then, then I find it out later on. How is that fair?
And I have a neighbor who, he's done 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and he does have license to carry, and he has several weapons, and I'm not really sure how many, but he's a very strong amendment supporter of right to carry and all that stuff. And that's what he always looks for, that in a candidate. So Dean Tran has got his vote. And how about if I said, my neighbor across the street, I'm scared he has guns. Who's to say that the police can't go over there and take away his guns and,
I mean, we on the flip side, and to Stephanie's point, and again, I'm not a fan of the bill as enacted into law because it's flawed. But let's not act like Massachusetts invented red flag legislation. I think 20-something other states have a similar law. I think what needs to happen is that it just more thought needed to go into it, and it just shouldn't have been such a knee-jerk reaction. It shouldn't have been rammed through. Senator Tran did offer some amendments on the floor. Maybe some of those should have been considered. I know he was wavering a little bit because I know that he wasn't a vocal no vote when it was first voted on in the Senate, and then he voted no on the final bill. But that shows me that he was wavering a little bit. Maybe if some of those amendments that he had offered had been put in when the bill was reconciled between the House and the Senate, maybe we'd have a better product right now.
There were a few that were taken out, a few amendments that were taken out that the Senate had passed that were taken out in conference committee. But to Deb's point also, is that a problem that anyone, an ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend that has an axe to grind can file an ERPO, your guns are confiscated, and now you're basically guilty until you prove yourself innocent, and then you have to pay for your own attorneys. And if you don't have thousands and thousands of dollars to pay for your own attorneys,
Right.
You're not going to get your guns back.
We're not that expensive.
My reading of the bill is that it has to be a family or close connection to you, someone who knows you well. So you would have to establish that there's a relationship there, and that they must exhibit dangerous and/or unstable behavior. So there has to be an incident reference that is provable in order for them to go in. I can't just say Cindy has guns and I'm afraid of them. I don't like them.
But an ex-girlfriend guy leaves her for somebody else, and she's ticked off, and she knows he's got his guns. She could easily go to the cops and say, he came to my house, he threatened me. I'm petrified of him. He's my ex. We lived together for 3 years. We just split up. Cops go there and take his guns.
Even if you get a restraining order, you have to prove that there's credible reason for it.
Correct, but that comes in the judicial review.
Yeah.
But the guns are already gone before that
Yes.
judicial review happens. The license is revoked before that judicial review
That's the
happens.
problem.
And if you can't afford your own attorneys, how are you going to defend yourself?
Well, that's definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration, but that happens in other situations as well. And as far as it goes, why not err on the side of caution?
Well,
if I had weapons and someone made that accusation against me, would I be upset? Of course.
I'd prefer to err on the
Would
side
I
of
want to
freedom.
defend it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can already you can already petition the court. If you have a relative that has mental issues and you're really concerned for them, there are already procedures out there that you can go to a judge and say, look at this guy, he's crazy. He's going to hurt somebody, and approach it in that way. So it's not as if there aren't protections already out there. I just think, like Michael said, maybe there's some adjustments that could have been made to just protect people's rights a little bit more. They did kind of rush this right through, and it just stripped a lot of people of rights and based on accusations.
It's an election year. They wanted that bullet point on their campaign
absolutely.
pamphlets.
Yeah.
Issue 2, 3 ballot initiative petitions scheduled to appear on the November ballot were withdrawn by their sponsors after the state legislature passed and Governor Baker signed the so-called Grand Bargain Bill. This bill raises the minimum wage to $15 an hour over 5 years, establishes paid family and medical leave for all employees, and gradually eliminates time and a half for retail workers on Sunday and holidays. In return, the Mass Retailers Association withdrew their initiative petition to reduce the sales tax to 5%. Was this indeed a grand bargain, or was it a bum deal, Stephanie?
A little of both. Both sides had to concede some things that they found important, but in the spirit of compromise, I feel like this is imperfect, but a definite step in the right direction.
Deb?
No, not a good bill at all. It's going to be a major job killer. For reasons of $15 an hour eventually it's going to get to, and you got retailers out there. And right now the challenge for even the big box stores and the mom and pops is the web, the internet, buying online. I have UPS coming into my complex where I live daily, and sometimes several times a day, delivering packages. People are buying online. Where is it taken from? It's taken from that mall down in Whitney Field or downtown Leominster. Now you do something like this to them, and this is another thing that's going to hurt the business. I don't agree with the minimum wage. I don't agree with the time and a half.
How about the family medical leave, paid family medical leave?
Where I am, you can get it for you mean that's an insurance actually, and you can get that. It's very relatively cheap, like $6 a week, something like that.
Michael?
It's just to Stephanie's point, we're always complaining about there not being enough compromise in Congress or in state legislatures. Well, I guess this was an effort that they made to compromise, and so some people still aren't happy. The idea, what we always say in the legal world, is that you've reached a good compromise, and then both sides walk away a little bit unhappy. And so, I think that's where we are with this case in terms of the substantive part of the what happened is I do sympathize with what Deb's saying, because this is an area where I am a little more conservative than some of my brethren on, in terms of I've never been convinced of the effectiveness of a minimum wage. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be making enough to live. I don't want to say that people should be making slave wages at the same time. I've never been convinced of this whole idea of a statutory increase in the minimum wage that's going to just cure our ills. It's
Depend on the work performed.
Won't cure the ills, but it'll ease the pain. Cindy?
I agree with Michael as far as the minimum wage. I'm not necessarily a fan of minimum wage laws. I think that the industry itself could take care of that. Right now we have an economic boom. I don't think it's not even an issue. $15 an hour is not the end of the world. It's graduated over 5 years, 4 or 5 years. So I think that's we can handle that. Here in Massachusetts, the wages are a little higher, so I think you can absorb that a little bit better. But now when you're talking about these paid leaves, that for a small employer and somebody to go out on leave and get paid for 12 weeks, and now I got to hire somebody else to fill in that position. So I just got a double payroll for 12 weeks to fill that position, and I just don't know if I agree with that part.
3 different issues to me.
And then the other part of it, the holidays and Sundays, a lot of that came back, really that was more back in the days when people went to church on Sundays. Sundays was the day of rest. People don't go to church now. Most of the millennials, they say, you said yourself, you posted an article, most of them are atheists, so what does it matter? They get, time and a half. I wouldn't want to pay, if I was a retailer, pay somebody $22 an hour on a Sunday to work behind a counter. No, I'm sorry.
You work on Sundays?
No.
Yeah, well, there you
but
go.
I chose a job and a career that I don't have to.
Okay.
She
Go to
goes to
school.
church.
Deb, I want to ask you a
Yeah.
question. You described the minimum wage increase as a job killer. So it's going up $4 from $11 to $15 over 5 years. Now, we heard the same thing back when Massachusetts raised it from $8 to $11 an hour. So this is going to be a job killer. Companies are going to hire less. They're going to lay off people. The result of that, from going from $8 to $11, is Massachusetts has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. So if it didn't happen then, why would it happen now?
Good question. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. I'm just looking at it, I didn't look at it from the historical perspective, but to me, $15 seems an awful lot for some of the work performed. Maybe various retailers should look at, what type of functions people are doing and base it on that. I'm not for that standardized, you have to pay them this much, or whatever. Every corporation should be
$15 an hour, and they can't even get your order right. I mean,
Right,
that's kind
exactly.
of like,
Those
come
are two
on,
different.
you
Those
know.
are two different issues. Those are two different.
Yeah.
But let me. If you
They
want to
would get
use
your order right.
if you want to use McDonald's though as an example, let's look at you pay the same price for a Big Mac in Fitchburg as you do in Ringe, New Hampshire, and the minimum wage in Ringe, New Hampshire is $7.50,
Yeah.
and here it's $11 an hour.
Yeah.
So there again, the argument that it's going to raise prices, it hasn't.
No.
They absorb it.
Yeah.
Stephanie,
Yes.
I'm sure you were against the Trump tax cuts.
Yes.
But these companies just got a huge tax cut. Couldn't that help absorb the minimum wage increase?
It could on a corporate level. I have read that there are some corporations that have hired more workers, and there are other corporations that have continued to give their COOs and CEOs big cushy bonuses and have continued to put the money that way. I think it's only fair that the people doing the actual work are compensated for their time. Their time is no less valuable than these COOs that are making thousands of dollars an hour.
Michael, have you seen any evidence? You said you're not a supporter of minimum wage. Have you seen any evidence whatsoever that companies are willing to funnel their resources to the bottom rather than the top unless they're forced to by the government?
No, and that's what stops me from coming out too forcefully against something like this. I mean, ultimately, you brought up the point to Deb, well, why didn't it happen when they raised the minimum wage from 8 to 11? Well, clearly the market was able to bear that.
Right.
Is it going to bear going from 11 to 15? I guess we're going to have to see. And maybe those opponents of the increase will be proven right this time. Maybe they won't be. Maybe history will repeat itself. I'm just not 100% sure. I'm not going to say I'm forcefully against it. I've just never been persuaded that it's the way to go. And yeah, I am a little bit wary of, some of the quality of the labor force out there. I'm a little bit wary of increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour when I see the quality of labor force that's out there.
And don't you think it's going to put teenagers? The teenagers they're having a hard enough time finding work,
Right.
and there's so many college kids out there that can't get a job. So if you're paying $15 an hour and you can get somebody who graduated from college versus a teenager, you're going to go for somebody that's got an education, even though it may be an entry level job. It's a good wage.
Jeff, you've worked
for sure.
in retail many years. What do you think about the elimination of time and a half on Sunday and holidays?
I think it's maybe. Let's see, how do I put this? There'll be less people who will be so wanting to work on time and on Sundays and holidays and things like that. And plus, I think coupled with the forced minimum wage increase, you're going to see less and less people in the big box stores working. You say now you go with someone wrote on Facebook just the other day, oh, I went into Sears and there's less people, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're going to see even less people because they're not going to, dish it out. They're going to give you less people. They'll budget less people to work.
Well, to me, it almost seems like a compromise. If you're going to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour, if you didn't limit the time and a half on Sundays, you're paying $22.50 an hour for.
Well, what about all the people that are already making over $15 an hour that now rely on that time and a half? They're not getting any increase because of this time and a half,
That's
and
true.
now because of the minimum wage, and now they're losing the time and a half.
Yeah, and now so they're going to want increased wages too because they're going to say, well, this guy just started and he's at $15 an hour. I've been working here 3 years and I'm at $16 an hour.
Stephanie, time and a half on Sundays and holidays.
I have personally benefited from time and a half and working on holidays. I think that if people are getting a livable wage, that does take a little of the sting out of it. My first thought when I read that was, if you belong to a union, will they still be able to negotiate for particular companies that are in a union contract to still continue to give time and a half on Sundays and holidays?
Yeah. An interesting point on that, too, is that the legislature in this grand bargain is eliminating the time and a half provision for Sundays and holidays, but they are leaving in place the blue law that says that Sundays and holidays are completely voluntary for retail workers. If retail workers wanted to, they could just organize and say, you know what, Sunday is the busiest shopping day of the year. Didn't used to be. Now Sunday is the busiest shopping day of the week. I'm sorry, the shopping day of the week. They could all just say, we're not going to work. And then the market forces would then require businesses to offer, even if it's not time and a half, some sort of premium pay, whether it be a differential or flex time or whatever it may be, to entice people to work.
Collective bargaining does work.
Government telling retail, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, and then they're coming into your home too and saying this.
The problem is that people
back
aren't organized
off
anymore. You would think with social media we'd be more organized than ever, but you can't even organize people to get to go to a city council meeting, and then they do whatever they want. So, who's to blame? Issue 3. Back in 1993, Bill Clinton became the first U.S. president to publicly impose a litmus test on the selection of a Supreme Court nominee. At the time, he said he would not nominate someone who would vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. This past week, Senator Susan Collins of Maine announced that she would vote against Trump's nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, for the Supreme Court if Kavanaugh is not committed to uphold Roe v. Wade. Just yesterday, Governor Charlie Baker came out and said he expects the Senate to thoroughly vet this nominee to ensure that that the nominee should uphold Roe v. Wade, or the nominee should be rejected. Deb, do you support U.S. senators voting against judicial nominees based on these kind of political litmus tests?
I don't think so.
No? Mike?
Well, look, litmus tests have been around for 100 years. Your question is very interestingly worded. You said Bill Clinton is the first one to publicly say that he would impose litmus tests. This has been going on for about 100 years in the U.S. Supreme Court. It's become a political body. It's become a political body ever since some of the commerce cases that happened in the 1920s, many of which political experts argue started the Great Depression. Okay, and then which were subsequently reversed by a more activist court. Ever since then, the Supreme Court, unfortunately, has been a political body, whether you agree with it or not. Okay, when Clarence Thomas got up there and one of his many lies before the Senate said, "Oh, I don't know how I would vote again on Roe versus Wade," nobody who knew anything about this stuff believed him.
Wasn't he the one accused of sexual harassment? Clarence Thomas? Yeah, back in...
Dumb as a sack of bricks, but don't get me started on Clarence Thomas.
Cindy?
No, I don't think there should be a litmus test myself. I think that the whole idea of the Supreme Court is they're there to interpret the law, not create laws. And we need to get away from that, right wing or left wing. I want a judge in there that's going to interpret the law as it is. We already have laws. Roe v. Wade is already an established law. It's already there. Why would we need to bring it up?
Bringing that up
again?
Do you notice that
I just don't think that should be.
Stephanie?
I support litmus tests with a caveat. I recognize I'm personally staunchly pro-choice, and I very much support Roe v. Wade. But I also understand that when you have a litmus test such as that, it can go the other way. For example, the same could be said, well, will you uphold the Second Amendment? Will you do anything to change that? That's another litmus test that can be used that personally I might not agree with. However, when it comes to rolling back rights or freedoms, I do get a little wonky with this. I think that the focus should be on whether or not they understand the Constitution and have a respect for precedents. And I think that should be the most important litmus test, but Roe v. Wade is important.
So if you support the litmus test for Roe versus Wade because it has to do with rights and freedoms.
I know where you're going with this.
And then you just turn around and said you don't support it for the Second Amendment. Just to understand, the Second Amendment is also rights and freedoms.
It is, absolutely. My son, actually, he's almost 15. He had asked me, if you could get rid of the Second Amendment, would you? And I said, no, I wouldn't. But I would change one word. I would add the word responsibly bear arms, because that would open the door to making sure that those who do have weapons are exercising the utmost in caution and responsibility.
Before we make two segments about firearms here, because I see you starting to, all right.
No, let's get this one on abortion. Let's keep this one on Roe versus
something
Wade.
that Cindy said. She said that we should respect judicial precedent and we shouldn't have activist judges, so that means Roe versus Wade shouldn't be overturned. However, Roe versus Wade came into existence because of an activist Supreme Court. You can't have it both ways. So you either should support judicial activism that causes cases like Roe v. Wade. There's no right to abortion in the Constitution. They had to, if you read Roe versus Wade, they had to cobble together like 7 amendments
Based on privacy.
to argue.
Based on privacy.
Yeah, to argue that
But
that
it's
a
still
right.
an established law.
Because of activist judges in the 70s. But activist judges in 2018 could make the argument, activist judges the other way, conservative activist judges could say, no, it's not written in the black letter of the Constitution, we're tossing it out. It was a mistake to begin with. And other legal precedents included Plessy versus Ferguson, that segregation separate but equal was okay. So, it's tough to.
And that
I
was
think,
overturned with Brown versus
and that
Board
was
of Education.
overturned because again, so it's hard. Look, my whole point on this, there's no right or wrong answer necessarily, but we have to go with reality. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, over the last 100 years, has become our third political body, okay? It's not a court like you would deem Fitchburg District Court or Worcester Superior Court. It just
Is it an appropriate question for United States senators whose job is to advise and consent to ask that nominee in the interview process, can you guarantee me that you will not overturn Roe versus Wade? Is that an appropriate question for a senator to put to a nominee? Anyone?
I believe so.
How could you ask? How do they know until they've been presented with the case?
They know.
You just said that it was here to stay. Then you're
well,
insinuating that
it's
it wouldn't
a
be
law.
challenged. It's challenged every day. There were 212, I could be wrong, different pieces of legislation in one calendar year that worked to erode Roe v. Wade, that worked to control women and not give them the right to say when they have a family, what their family size is, and that's baloney.
So if you were in the United States Senate, you would ask that question?
Be the first one out of my mouth. Second question I asked my husband when I met him. First
Really?
was, do you vote? And then I asked if he was pro-choice or anti-choice. Because I don't have time to waste.
Did he lie?
No, he told me the truth.
And you married him anyway?
I married him because.
She loved him.
Do you have a litmus test like that on your husband?
No. I don't know. I guess I look at Roe v. Wade as an established law, so I don't fear it going anywhere. But I do see where the concern would be, because there are conservatives out there that want it to go away, and so I guess it's a legitimate question. I just don't think that that'd be like saying, okay, you promise me you're never ever going to vote against any restricted gun bill ever. Okay.
Got my vote.
What, could a good judge honestly say that? Could a good judge honestly say, I will never ever vote a certain way without being presented a case first?
But a woman having dominion over her own body is a pretty fundamental principle, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. I do agree with that. But I also believe in the right to bear arms, and I know there's a lot of people who would love to take that away. So, and there are left-wing judicial people that would love to take the guns away too, if they had the opportunity.
Michael, grilling season, how do you like your steak?
Mooing.
I know you guys. So well done.
Oh, disgusting.
Mooing.
Medium rare.
Anything over rare is ruining it. I asked Scott Lively that today when I interviewed him today.
But that's about it.
You know, your president likes it well done with ketchup on it.
Well, I can see
Isn't that
That's
enough?
my
Isn't that
ketchup.
enough to vote against him?
Yeah, no ketchup. A1 sauce, maybe. Yeah.
Deb
I do like
Toivonen,
A1.
Stephanie Trudel, thank you for joining us, and that's going to do it for Flap TV. Have a good day.